Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you.
Yeah, happy April.
Here we are, April, and last week we talked about working through processes to get to the point of in losses to get to the point of accepting and being able to move on. Right. And we talked about all kinds of losses and traumas and different things, but today we're going to focus on one in particular. We're going to focus on the ending of a romantic relationship.
That's right. We typically don't think of grief, and most of us, when we think about grief and loss, we think about somebody dying, passing, on, and we typically think about that. But any kind of life-changing event, retirement, empty nest, or romantic relationship, anything that suddenly changes your life, involves this process of acceptance and moving on. And we talked about romantic relationships last week, and as one of those life-changing events. And lo and behold, I had an individual come in this week who is going through just such a breakup, and wasn't ready for it, didn't see it coming, and has just been devastated. He's been going through it for a couple of months now. And he came in and said, I'm really having trouble getting over it, accepting it, and moving on. So I thought, well, maybe again, it's time to talk about this particular kind of loss in particular. And so there's a fellow out there by the name of Gary Lewandowski, who is currently at Monmouth University. And he's considered one of the experts on the breakup of a romantic relationship. And I thought, well, I knew about Lewandowski years ago. I'd read his work, I don't know, 12 or 15 years ago. And I thought, well, let me see if he's updated anything. And lo and behold, I found this article entitled "A Breakup." And I was intrigued by the article because he said, a breakup doesn't have to leave you broken.
Right.
That's the kind of thing I'm looking for, is not just a self-help thing, but really good advice from a guy who's been doing this a long time.
Right.
And so this is this issue of romantic breakups of romantic relationship is important to talk about, first of all, because it probably does happen to everybody. I mean, unless you're going to live a completely single life with no intimate relationships, but I don't know how anybody does that. I guess it's possible. But first of all, the ending of a romantic relationship happens to all of us. I mean, my goodness, it starts happening in middle school.
Right.
Absolutely. In middle school and high school and college and on. So across a lifespan, romantic relationships begin and end, and it's something we're all dealing with. So number one, it happens to everybody. But number two, it's really, really devastating. I mean, of the many types of losses you can have, the unexpected ending of a romantic relationship is really, really devastating.
Right. And there are different factors that can make it more or less devastating. If it's it sounds as the person you're referring to, the patient from earlier this week, when it's unexpected, when you feel like everything is going just fine, and then all of a sudden, that your partner is saying that they're leaving, and there's some discussion. There's no
she did.
Warning.
The woman just left. I mean, he was expecting that he anticipated that the relationship would continue to grow and that they would eventually either marry or certainly end up together. He had no reason to expect otherwise. And suddenly she just walked away. Right. I mean, it was absolutely devastating for him. So it was completely unexpected.
Right. And also related to that is, it's also really much more challenging when one person wants the relationship to end and the other person doesn't.
Right.
And of course, it's worse for the person who doesn't want the relationship to end. Right. That can be really difficult. But, that is another factor that kind of weighs into this. This issue.
Right.
So
yeah. And then it's doubly difficult if the person who's leaving the relationship doesn't explain why You know,
Right.
if you don't know why the relationship ended, and then of course so you don't get closure. So
Right.
it's like you're left in this state of what you don't even know why it ended. So you
Right.
can't even, I mean, if the person would say, look, I've met somebody else,
Right.
okay, or I'm leaving the country, or I've decided I'm making some other decision. At least the person who's going to be left can start to get closure. They can begin to work on, okay, but when you don't know, it makes it even more difficult. Okay.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
certainly the end of a romantic relationship is a major loss. It's one of those major life-changing events that we talked about last week. And the reason is because you're yanked from your comfort zone. Here you are in this relationship that you assume is going to go on for a long time. And all of a sudden it's over. You know, so you're yanked out of your comfort zone. You weren't able to prepare for it. It's like the sudden loss of a friend in an automobile accident. I
Right.
mean, you had no time to prepare. You just get a phone call and somebody's gone, you know,
Right.
and so there's no preparation. And you're thrown into this hole. I mean, that's what this guy described. He said, I feel like I'm in this hole and I can't get out of it.
Right. Yeah. And so, it's the end of these types of relationships are so difficult because, as the relationship ends and you're looking back, you don't always think about the way that things really were. You tend to think about the way that you wish that they were, the things that you wish you had done, the things that you
Right.
wish had happened. There may be some things that you wish that hadn't happened.
Right.
And so we have a difficult time sometimes of looking back at it in a realistic, factual manner. We tend to sometimes we tend to focus on only the good things. Sometimes we tend to focus on only the bad things, but we're left in this state of just perseveration, almost like what we talked about last
That's
week.
right.
We're just kind of
Right.
mulling through things over and over again, not really getting to any resolution of anything,
Mhm.
but just thinking about all the what ifs, whys, and all of that just maintains the pain. It maintains the hurt of
That's right.
the loss.
You know, and so Lewandowski points out in this article, is, well, why are these things so difficult to manage? And one of the things he says that, when I think of Eric Erickson, you get to
Right.
the last stage of psychosocial development, and you look back at your life, you're not going to look back and say, wow, I wished I would have gotten a bigger boat. I wished I would have had more car. You don't think about possessions. You think about relationships.
Right.
How did I do with my romantic, how to do with my kids? How would I do? Was I good with my parents? And so that's what you tend to think about are your relationships. How did I do in my relationship? So we know that relationships are really, really important. And this kind of a relationship, you're right. You start to think, as this guy is, you're going to start to perseverate on the hard parts, the bad parts of this. You want to think about the good parts. That only brings you more pain because that's
Right.
what you really miss. And then you start to get really negative and really dark, thinking, I can't do anything about this. Not only am I at a loss, not only am I in this
Right.
deep hole, I have no control over this. I can't do anything about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So this kind of a breakup where somebody just walks out of your life, very, very difficult. And when we think about it, it makes matters even worse.
Right.
Our thinking makes the event even worse.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, the one of the things that he says in the article is that breakups are bad. They're just not as awful and devastating as we think. It's because when we think about it, the more that we think about it, the more devastated, the more awful it is.
That's right.
Because typically, and again, when we think about this a relationship ending, one person tends to not always, but tends to have a little bit better of a tendency to think back and understand why the relationship is ending, and the other person sometimes has a difficult time with that.
Mhm.
But most relationships end for important reasons, because there's some incompatibility, there were some problems, there were some issues, and usually those problems are building up over time. But sometimes those problems are really difficult for one of the partners to see. They don't understand it, they don't see it, they don't hear it. And when the other partner finally gets to that point where they are like, okay, this is over, yeah, that the person can be devastated and have no idea, not have any understanding as to why they are where they are. So
that's right. Yep. But I like the phrase that you mentioned, that breakups are bad. They're just not as bad as we make them out to be. Okay.
Right.
That we think they are.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and he says every breakup is a mix of negative and positive emotions. Okay. The problem is, and this is true about life, the negative emotions are simply easier to access.
Right.
The heartache and the pain are very easy to get to. Okay. Yeah. And so the problem is the negative parts of the negative parts are much easier to access. They're right at the surface and they're always there.
Right.
On the other hand, the positive parts of it, if you're ever going to move forward, you have to find the positives.
Right.
And I know for this guy, at least, he doesn't see any positives yet.
Right.
It's too fresh. He just can't get to the positives. He's focused completely on the negatives.
And what we're talking about here with negatives and positives is negatives and positives of the ending of the relationship. So the negative of the end of the relationship is the heartache and the loss and the pain and all that kind of stuff. The positives are, okay, where am I going from here? And how can I take this experience and turn it into something that's going to, help me or, help me in future relationships and things like that. Like what we talked about last week with moving on. With moving on, you've accepted the loss, and now you're figuring out how can I take this experience and grow from it and move on to other things in my life. What Lewandowski is referring to as positives is that moving on piece, that, okay, that's now I got to get to that next stage. Right.
And, I'm laughing, I'm kind of smiling here because I'm thinking he does give you a little slap on the cheek with the first one, because he said, look, let's admit something. At the beginning of a relationship, he said, we're all on our best behavior and everything's perfect, right? And you meet somebody and it's wonderful and you have all that oxytocin is flowing, and you have found Mrs. Right or Mr. Right. I mean, this is the person I've been looking for. But he said, let's be honest. The beginning of a relationship, everything is perfect because we're all on our best behavior.
Right.
But we know that doesn't last. In our head, and this is getting to the positives, we know that those feelings aren't going to last. We hope otherwise. We talk ourselves into, this is the one I've been looking for. This is going to remain perfect forever. And we cling to that hope.
Right. Yeah. We hold on to it. And sometimes we are ourselves, we know that we're doing something that we wouldn't typically do. Like, when you're spending time at that, the person that you're seeing, you're spending time with them, and you're being exceptionally patient, or you're being exceptionally calm in a particular situation, or you make a joke about something that would really, you're making a joke about it because it's really upsetting you, and so you make a joke about it. That you're doing those things to keep yourself presenting in this positive light, but like you said, we don't think about how, okay, a couple of years from now, am I going to have that same kind of patience? Am I going to have that same type of perspective? Maybe you will, but if you have a tendency not to be that way, then you're probably not. And we have to be honest with ourselves and, as it suggests, recognize that they're doing the same thing. The partner's doing the same thing. That's right.
And so how do we get to positive? How do we get beyond these easy to access negative feelings and get on? Well, one of the things we learn is that, as difficult as it is, we can make it through this. If this is going to happen to you more than once. For most people, they're going to have a relationship that ends, but they're going to have more than one, they're going to experience it more than one time. Absolutely. So what do you learn? You learn that you can make it through. You know it's painful, you know it hurts, but you're going to make it through because you've done this before. Okay? Right. The other thing we learn is we learn how to handle conflict within ourselves and with the other person. If it was a conflict that ended the relationship because there's a lesson there. Why did this relationship end? Because there was some sort of unresolved conflict.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We
And,
also,
and understanding that is really important because once you understand what that conflict is, then you're going to be better able to handle it in the future. You're going to be able to
That's right.
able to recognize it in the future so that you can avoid it or you can prevent it. But it isn't really important to remember that,
right?
And recognize that.
And the other thing is we learn who not to date.
Right.
I mean,
Absolutely.
this didn't work out for some reason.
Right.
So maybe I'm dating the wrong people. If I have a series of failed relationships, maybe it's something about the people I'm choosing.
Right.
And that so I got to think long and hard about maybe I need to think about what kind of person I really want to be with. Okay?
Right. Yeah. You start to recognize those warning signs that, oh, this is an indication the last time this happened,
Right.
this turned into these kinds of problems. And so I need to recognize it as early as possible through those early warning signs.
That's right. Maybe I'm attracted to the brightest bulb in the room, but maybe the brightest bulb in the room isn't the right person for me.
Right.
That's not what I want. Yes, it's very attractive. She's
Yeah.
very pretty and everybody likes her and she's hot, and she's this and she's that, but maybe that's not the person you want for a long-term relationship.
Right.
And so it gives you the opportunity, the breakup gives you the opportunity to think about what kind of a person do I want to be with. We also get better at recognizing the warning signs that this might not be the right relationship. Okay. And each time we have a breakup, we learn a little bit more about how to move on. Okay.
Right. Absolutely.
And then he uses this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson who said, "Our greatest joy is not in never failing, but in rising up every time we fail."
Right.
And so, that's what we have. How many times do we say, well, it's not what happened to you, it's how you dealt with it. It's how you think about it, right? And that's what this is. It's in applying that same concept to romantic relationships, is that it's going to happen to you.
Right.
It's how you deal with it that makes a difference.
Well, and it makes me think of everything else that we talk about with trying in failure. Every time we fail at something, it's an opportunity to learn and grow and become our better selves. And this is the same thing. And recognizing straight off that it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel at that time. It doesn't feel as though anything positive can come from this.
Right.
What in the world could be good about feeling the way that I feel right now with the loss of this relationship? But something good can come from that. Something, I often think of, watching movies and things like that, even don't roll your eyes, but even like Marvel movies and things like that. And it's talking about all of these different possibilities, the multiverse stuff and everything like that. The next relationship you have may be that great relationship that you were looking for, right?
That's right.
But that relationship would never be had you not been through the ones previous.
That's right.
So we have to think of they all build on each other. And yes, you have to go through these really lousy, horrible experiences, these really painful experiences, but those experiences get you down the line to where you're really looking to be.
Right. That's right. And that's exactly where this guy right now is, just stuck on all the negatives. It's a fresh wound. It's only a couple months old. And something about him is he's telling himself, this is lingering too long. I'm stuck on these negative. I just can't move on. And so he's still in the negative part. And so my task with him will be to get him to begin to move in the, moving on. What we talked about, moving on. Okay. And so we're talking about all the things he's learned from this relationship, and he has to use this experience to get better for the next relationship. He's got to, choose wise, like Indiana Jones, choose wisely,
Right.
He has to learn. What did you learn from this? Okay. And so I'm going to take him through that, because in some cases, what Lewandowski says is you have to think about what you're gaining with this loss. Funny juxtaposition. but what am I gaining with this loss? Well, in some cases, you really are going to be better off. I mean, if you really sit back and think about it
Right.
without the pain, the way he puts it is you're off probation.
Right.
You know, some relationships are difficult. I mean, it's,
Right.
you know, you have to look good, and you have to smell good, and your clothes have to be right. And it's just, no matter what you do, it just feels like a lot of work. You know,
Right.
you
Yeah.
want the relationship, but God. On the other hand, you could have somebody who's always, you know, somebody who's always nagging you. I want more time. I want this. I want that. And you don't like the nagging. You're also suspicious. You might have suspicions that the person is seeing somebody else, or there's this constant negativity that, you know, you want to be together, but geez, it just takes a lot out of you. Okay.
Right.
So you can start by thinking about, you know, maybe I'm better off without this relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, all relationships require a lot of work. You know,
Right.
it's not there's not an easy relationship, not an easy relationship that lasts. You know, every relationship takes some effort.
Right.
But yeah, when you step back and you look at it, and avoid that tendency of looking at what am I losing right now.
Right.
You know, what am I losing as far as some consistency that I've had? You know,
Right.
we've lived in the same house for all this time. We've done the same routines for all this time. But if you can step back from those losses of comfort or of routine, of predictability, you start to see that, okay, yeah, I don't have to worry about this anymore, because man, it was really difficult when she would do this or when he would do that.
Right.
And oh yeah, you know, this is something that we, you know, a couple of times a week we were arguing about this or that. And now you can look back at, okay, I'm actually gaining some time. I'm gaining some emotional energy. I'm gaining some positivity in my life, because I'm not on edge, or I'm not, you know, as frustrated as I was before.
That's right. And we can give 1,000 examples of incompatibility.
Absolutely.
You know, like, well, my partner loves to go to the beach. I want to be with her, so I go to the beach. I hate going to the beach. You know, it's what some people will say. Or she wants to go clubbing. She wants to go to nightclubs. That's her idea of a good time. And I don't like to stay up late, but I do it because I want to be with her. So you have to think about all those things too, that maybe, just maybe, you're better off. Okay. And so Lewandowski did a study a few years ago of people who had a romantic relationship breakup, and 1 in 3, 33%, said the breakup experience was mostly negative. Was overall, it was negative.
Right.
But then they looked at the data and said 41% said that it was positive overall.
Right.
When they really looked at it and they got over it, more people said it was a positive experience than a negative experience. Now, why does that happen? Because a partner should help you grow.
Right.
Okay. Right. Should make you better. If the relationship isn't doing that,
right,
it can't grow.
Right. You know, one of the things I often tell couples that I'm working with is I refer back to the Gottmans, is a couple who have done a lot of research and writing in the areas of relationships. And one of the things that they emphasize in their trainings is that, you know, relationships aren't a zero-sum game, right? So, and we find ourselves in, Richard, I know that you've had this experience too, working with couples where it's almost like if one person in the relationship is gaining, is growing,
right?
It's like the other one has to be diminishing in some way. They have to be kept down. They have to be, they can't be growing at the same time. And so it becomes this competition. And in a relationship, a healthy relationship, both partners are growing together. They may not be growing in exactly the same domains, the same areas, but they're both becoming, you know, the more optimal version of themselves, as well as optimal version of their relationship.
Right.
And sometimes, you know, we hear people talk about, you know, what they call them, emotional vampires, you know, people who just drain your emotional energy. And it's like you just feel stifled, and you feel you start to wither, and you can't grow. And you know, that's that's not a good sign for a lasting relationship. We don't want to be in those kinds of situations with
That's
with
right.
a partner.
That's right. And so one of the most effective ways of getting to positive, of moving on, is to look at the relationship and say, were you both growing in this relationship?
Right.
Were both of you benefiting? Was this relationship making you a better person? Okay.
Right.
Because if not, then maybe it was a good thing that it ended.
Right.
And as he says, and this is hard to do, and I can't introduce this idea yet with the individual I'm seeing. Great relationships seldom fail.
Right.
You know, when two people are in a relationship, both are growing, both are benefiting, both are sustained by the relationship, it's good. So great relationships seldom fail, but bad ones do, and they should. Now that's a bit of a cold water. That's cold water, but if you sit back and think about it, if a relationship fails, there's probably a reasonable explanation of why it failed. It just wasn't meant to be for some reason. You remember that song, Thank God for Unanswered Prayers?
Yeah.
That old country tune. And that's what I thought about when I was reading this. I said, yeah, sometimes, you're really better off.
Right.
And so you need to get there, but getting there is difficult when you're stuck only on the negatives, and we realize that that's where many of us get stuck. But there is good reason to move on. And one of the things you learn is there was a reason why this ended. And so what do I learn from it? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because, the piece to this that I think about is that, we experience those negatives, but we live in a comfort zone. We're living in this place, but I know. And how many times do people say, well, I'd rather have the evil I know than the evil I don't know, or the bad that I know than the bad that I don't know. And that, to some extent, that makes sense. But when it comes to these kinds of relationships, why do we have to have that kind of bad anyways? When it's a healthy relationship, again, you're growing together, you're nurturing each other, you're supporting each other, you're helping each of you are helping each other grow. And so if you have these negatives that are happening, if you have these things where you feel like you're constantly having to change or to accommodate or to make some concessions, and you don't feel like your partner is ever doing that, that's not a sign of a good, healthy, balanced relationship.
That's right.
And so stepping back and looking at it from that sort of, I think you sort of suggested this earlier, kind of take some of those that emotional lens down a little bit and look at it from a realistic, this is what was actually happening perspective, and be honest.
Right.
Then you start to see that, it's really difficult situation. And it's all of these bad things. Yes. These losses are really, really difficult. All these changes that are going to happen are really, really difficult. But in the end, it's what needs to happen.
That's right. And you don't be afraid to let go. I mean, that's, I think the first step is, it's okay. You can let go. Some people, I've talked to some people and they say, well, if I let go, I feel like I'm being disloyal, like I'm doing something wrong. No, you're not doing anything. I should have done
more. I could have worked harder. I could have done.
That this is somehow my fault, and it might be, okay. The point is, even if a relationship is good enough that you're willing to do all that stuff, ending it allows you to get an even better one. I mean, and that's the way this guy has to start thinking about it. Is that no matter how good this relationship was, if there was something missing, we don't know what it is. That's okay. We don't need to know. All we need to know is that something was missing. I know that he wants to know what it was, but he may never know. What he does know is something was missing. And as good as this relationship was, he now has the opportunity to have an even better relationship. right? And
Because
that's
he's going to be a better person. He's going to be able,
right.
if he grows and he learns from it, then he's going to be better,
Right.
which is going to
Right.
automatically make the next relationship better. And
Right.
you're right. You may not always get closure, because there just may not be an answer to your questions that you have on why this or
Right.
why that. You may not get the answers to those questions because your former partner doesn't want to give you the answers, or
That's right.
there may just not be an answer.
Yeah. What do they
It
call
may
that?
just be that, we talked about earlier that in the beginning of relationships, we sort of put on, our best selves. It may just be that as time passed, the real selves started to come out, and those real selves weren't as compatible as the ideal selves.
That's right.
That's nobody's fault. It
Nope.
just is.
Yep. It just, you may never know the reason, but you do know that something caused the two of you to break up. May have been something you did,
Right.
she did, he did. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Something happened. Okay. And so now you go build a better one.
Right.
Okay. Learn from this. Make sure you don't make the same mistake again. Don't go out and choose the same kind of person.
Right.
If you have a type, people say, well, I have a type. Well, I know some people have a type and they chose it 3 times and it failed 3 times.
Right.
Well,
You type.
I know a woman she was married 3 times and she kept choosing the same type of person.
Yeah.
Of course they all failed. Okay. Because you were choosing the wrong kind of person. There's nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with him, but that's not the person you were, and you did it 3 times.
Right.
Okay, so that means that you need to reevaluate what you think is your type.
Absolutely.
So this relationship breaks up, and now what do you do? And I had not heard of this before, but at the end of the article, somewhere in the article is embedded a link, and I went to the link, and I said, and it was about a Japanese art form called kintsugi. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not.
I have not heard of it. And he said, what kintsugi is, it's spelled Kintsugi. I don't know whether the G is hard or soft. So I don't know whether it's kintsugi or kintsugi, probably a soft G. Kintsugi is an art form in Japan. And what it is that if an item breaks, like a clay vessel, a bowl, the vessel breaks and breaks into 3 or 4 pieces. Well, in our country, we throw it out. Okay.
Right.
But in a country with fewer resources, they put the vessel back together. But when they put it together, and they use a lacquering, the Japanese have these lacquered boxes and things. So they make a lacquer that's mixed with gold or silver or platinum powder. So it's a very valuable commodity. And they repair the piece as an artist would repair the piece. And they have this very valuable lacquer on it. And and the idea is that the repaired vessel is more beautiful than the original one.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so you get the idea here is that, yes, you had a breakup, but just as in kintsugi, the new relationship, the new vessel, the new thing that you build can be even more beautiful than the thing you lost. And so in Japan, it's an art form, but it's also a philosophy of life that when these things happen, you can make a better, more beautiful one with the pieces.
Right. Absolutely. And, it is a matter of picking up the pieces and putting yourself back together after these breakups. And so as the title of the article suggests, even after a breakup, you don't have to remain broken. You can put yourself back together and become a more valuable, healthier, more advanced version of your true self.
Yeah. In fact, in Japan, in some cultures, people break things intentionally so that they have the opportunity to build a better one, to build a more beautiful one. So it's a way of life in those countries, and probably we're wise to think about that, because I think the message here is that, my goodness, yes, it's painful. A romantic breakup is always devastating, but you can move on. to the positives. Mhm.
Absolutely.
Make it, the obligation is to do it right the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that there are lots of listeners out there who have been through something like this, or are going through something like this, or are planning to be, or anticipating going through something like this. So, good luck. It is difficult. We've all been through it. It is difficult, but you will get through and be able to move on so that you can become that better version of yourself and find a healthier relationship to come. So.
That's right.
All right.
And always be the next one could be better.
Absolutely.
As good as this one is, the next one should be even better.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, that's it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.